The morning they let me out, it was raining. Not a dramatic storm, just a thin, cold drizzle, the kind that soaks through your coat before you even realize it's wet. I stood outside the gates of Clayport Correctional with a plastic bag containing everything I owned, 2 changes of clothes, a Bible my cellmate had given me, and a check for $31,400, the wages I had earned over 7 years of working in the prison laundry. Every single dollar saved because there was nothing else to do with it and nowhere else to put it. A corrections officer handed me an umbrella. I don't know why. Maybe he felt sorry for me. Maybe it was just procedure. I took it and stood there for a moment, looking out at the empty parking lot, and I thought, there is no one coming. My daughter wasn't coming. My sister wasn't coming. The man I had spent 31 years married to was in the ground and had been for 4 of those 7 years, and I had not been allowed to attend his funeral. I was 63 years old, standing in the rain outside a prison I should never have entered, and I had nowhere to go. Let me tell you how I got there. Let me tell you the whole thing, because people only ever heard half of it, the half that made me look guilty. My husband's name was Gerald. Gerald Morrow. He was a quiet man, a careful man, a retired civil engineer who spent his weekends restoring antique clocks and making the best smoked brisket in Harlan County, Kentucky. We had been married since I was 32 years old. We had one daughter, Patrice, who was 32 when all of this began, and we had a son-in-law named Devlin. I want you to remember that name, Devlin Ashworth, because every single thing that happened to me began and ended with him. Patrice had married Devlin 9 years before my life fell apart. I never liked him. I want to be honest about that, because some people would say I had reasons to want to hurt him, and I suppose on paper they'd be right. He was slick the way some men are slick, always smiling, always with the right answer, always making you feel like you were the difficult one for not trusting him. He borrowed money from Gerald twice and paid it back once. He talked over my daughter at dinner. He called me Mom before I ever gave him permission to. But I kept my mouth shut because Patrice loved him, and because Gerald said I was too hard on people, and because I had learned by 60 that you cannot choose your children's hearts for them. What I didn't know, what none of us knew, was that Devlin had been slowly, methodically, for almost 3 years, forging Gerald's signature on financial documents. He had set up a secondary account in Gerald's name. He had been redirecting portions of Gerald's pension distributions. He had taken out a home equity line of credit on our house. The house Gerald and I had paid off together, and drawn $190,000 from it over 18 months. Gerald found out in March. He confronted Devlin, and 6 weeks later, my husband was dead. The coroner ruled it a cardiac event. Gerald had a history of high blood pressure, a mild heart attack 12 years prior. It was plausible. It was even probable, the doctor said. 67 years old, moderate health, high stress. But I knew something was wrong. I knew it the way you know things after 31 years of sleeping next to someone, of knowing every pattern of their body and their days. Gerald had seemed fine. He had been angry, furious, actually. But he'd been eating well, sleeping well. He had an appointment with his cardiologist the week after he died. He had seemed to me like a man who was about to fight. I told the police I suspected foul play. I told them about the money. I told them about Devlin. And somehow, within 4 months, I was the one arrested. Devlin had covered himself beautifully. He'd had time, 6 weeks between Gerald's confrontation and Gerald's death, to restructure everything. The financial records, by the time investigators looked at them, pointed directly at me. My name was on the joint accounts. I had moved money between accounts, legitimately, to pay contractors renovating our bathroom, but it looked like concealment. Gerald had written me a letter, handwritten, in the last week of his life, that said, "I don't know what to do about her." Devlin produced that letter. The prosecution used it. My own lawyer told me the jury would be sympathetic to a grieving son-in-law. The jury was not sympathetic to me. Financial exploitation of an elderly spouse. That was the charge. They couldn't make a murder charge stick without a definitive cause of death, so they went after the money. 7 years. I was sentenced to 7 years. Patrice did not visit me once. I want you to sit with that for a moment, because I have had to sit with it for 7 years. My daughter, who I raised, who I drove to dance recitals and held through her first heartbreak and sewed her wedding dress alterations at 2 a.m, chose her husband's story over her mother's life. I wrote to her every month for the first 2 years. After that, I stopped. So when I walked out of Clayburg Correctional with my plastic bag and my umbrella and my $31,400 check, I had no family waiting. I took a bus to a motel in Covington that accepted weekly rates, and I sat on the edge of a bed with a polyester comforter and I made a list of what I needed to do. First, deposit the check and get my finances stable. Second, find Gerald's grave. I hadn't been allowed to attend the funeral. I didn't even know for certain where he was buried. It took me 2 phone calls to find out. Gerald's brother, my brother-in-law Raymond, had handled the arrangements. He told me, when I called, that Gerald was at Millbrook Cemetery, Section 4, and then he was quiet for a long moment and he said, "I always believed you, Clara." I didn't know what to do with that, so I just thanked him and hung up. Clara, that's my name. Clara Morrow, formerly of 14 Sycamore Ridge Road, Harlan County, Kentucky, currently of room 112, the Covington Budget Inn. I went to see Gerald on a Thursday afternoon, 3 weeks after my release. I had bought flowers at a grocery store, yellow chrysanthemums, because Gerald always said roses were predictable. I had worn my good blue cardigan, the one I'd had before prison, which still fit but felt strange, like wearing the skin of a person I used to be. Millbrook Cemetery was quiet that afternoon. It was mid-October and the trees had gone amber and rust along the edges, and the light came in low and golden the way it does in Kentucky autumn. Under different circumstances, it would have been beautiful. I found Section 4. I walked along the rows reading names until I found his. Gerald Thomas Morrow. Beloved father, not beloved husband. I noticed that. I stood there and noticed that, and I thought about who had chosen those words, and I placed my chrysanthemums against the stone, and I did not cry. I had cried every tear I had in the first year of prison. What was left was something quieter and harder. Not grief, exactly, more like the place where grief goes when it has nowhere left to move. I don't know how long I stood there. Long enough for the light to shift. That's when I heard the sound. It was small, a rustling, the crunch of dry leaves, and it came from behind a large oak tree about 20 feet to my left. I turned, and I saw a pair of small sneakers at the base of the tree, pink with white Velcro straps. "Hello," I said. "Nothing. I can see your shoes, sweetheart." A pause, then a little face peered around the trunk. She was perhaps 6 or 7 years old, with dark braids and enormous brown eyes and a puffy purple jacket that was slightly too big for her. She looked at me with the particular solemnity that small children sometimes have, that ancient, appraising look, like they're deciding whether you're worth their time. "Are you the lady who used to live in that house?" she asked. I blinked. "Which house?" "The one on Sycamore Ridge. My daddy drives past it sometimes." He points at it. My heart did something strange in my chest. "Who's your daddy, honey?" She stepped fully out from behind the tree. She was holding a single stem of something. A wildflower, pale purple, already wilting. She walked to the grave next to Gerald's, a grave I hadn't paid attention to, and placed it carefully against the stone. I looked at the stone. It read, "Margaret Ashworth. Beloved grandmother. Ashworth. What's your name?" I asked, and my voice came out very careful and very steady. "Nora," she said. "Nora Ashworth." She looked up at me with those enormous eyes. "Did you know the man in this grave?" "You were talking to him." "I was," I said. "He was my husband." She tilted her head. "My grandma is right here." she said, gesturing at the stone. My daddy brings me sometimes. He says Grandma Margaret knows things, and if you talk to her, she can hear you. She paused. Do you believe that? I think I might, I said. She sat down on the grass, cross-legged, with the naturalness of a child who finds nothing strange about cemetery visits. She looked up at me. Are you sad? Yes, I said, because there was no point in lying to a 7-year-old. My daddy cries when he comes here, she said conversationally, but he doesn't know I see him. He thinks I'm looking at the butterflies. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, one time I heard him talking to Grandma and he said he was sorry. I sat down on the bench nearby. There was a small iron bench a few feet away, because my legs had gone slightly unreliable. What was he sorry about? I asked, very gently. Nora picked at a piece of grass. I don't know all of it, she said. I was only little then, but he said sorry for what he did to the old man, and he said Grandma already knew because she saw it happen. She looked up at me, direct and clear-eyed. But Grandma died right after the old man did, so she couldn't tell anybody. The world went very quiet. Nora, I said, how old are you? 7.5, she said with great dignity. And your daddy, what's his first name? Devlin, she said. But Mommy calls him Dev, she paused. They fight a lot now. Mommy found papers. What kind of papers? She shrugged, the extravagant shrug of a child who has overheard things beyond her comprehension. I don't know. Old papers. She was crying. She put them in a box and she hid the box. She looked at me with sudden interest. Why are you looking at me like that? I realized my hand had gone to my mouth. I lowered it. I'm sorry, sweetheart. I'm just thinking. My teacher says that face means you're surprised. I am surprised, I said. A little? She nodded, satisfied with this. Then she stood up, dusted off her jacket, and picked up a small backpack I hadn't noticed. She was apparently preparing to leave. Nora, I said, does your mom know you're here? She's over there, Nora said, pointing toward the cemetery entrance. She's on her phone. She always lets me come to visit Grandma by myself because she says it's private. She paused at the edge of the path. I hope you feel less sad, she told me seriously. Talking to them helps, even if you can't hear them talk back. Then she turned and walked away through the amber leaves, her purple jacket bobbing, and I sat on that iron bench next to my husband's grave, and I understood, with a clarity I hadn't felt in 7 years, that something had just cracked open. I didn't approach the woman by the entrance. Not that day. I wasn't ready. And I wasn't sure, and I had learned, in 7 years of prison, of legal proceedings, of being misunderstood and misrepresented, that you do not move until you know what you're moving toward. I went back to my motel room, and I lay on the polyester comforter, and I stared at the ceiling, and I thought about what a 7-year-old child had just told me. So simply, in the way that children tell you things, without drama, without understanding the weight, without any idea of what they've just handed you. He said sorry for what he did to the old man. She put the papers in a box and hid the box. I had a check for $31,400. I had time. I had nothing left to lose. The next morning I called Raymond. He came to meet me at a diner in Covington, and when he walked in and saw me, he looked so old. We had both gotten so old. And he sat down across from me and folded his hands on the table and said, Tell me everything. So I did. I told him about Nora. I told him about the papers in the box. I told him about what she had heard Devlin say at the grave. Raymond was quiet for a long time. Then he said, Clara, there's something I should have told you years ago, and I didn't, and I have to live with that. He told me that in the weeks before Gerald died, Gerald had confided in him, had told him about confronting Devlin, had told him that he had made copies of certain documents, the forged signature pages, the account statements, the loan documents, and had given them to someone for safekeeping. Who? I said. Raymond looked at me. Margaret Ashworth. I put down my coffee cup. Devlin's mother, Raymond said. Gerald trusted her. She'd known him for years. She used to be in the same church as us. Gerald said she was appalled when she found out what her son had done. She agreed to hold the documents. She said if anything ever happened to Gerald, she would make sure the truth came out. Raymond's voice dropped. She had a stroke 11 days after Gerald died. She was gone within the week. The papers, I said. The papers Nora saw her mother find. Raymond looked at me. Margaret kept them, I said. She hid them somewhere. And when she died, whatever she owned passed to Devlin, to his household. And Patrice found them. We sat there in that diner in Covington, Raymond and I, and neither of us spoke for almost a full minute. She knows, I said finally. Patrice knows. And that, I think, was the cruelest thing of all. Not the betrayal, not the forged documents, not even the 7 years. The cruelest thing was understanding in that moment that my daughter had known, perhaps not for all 7 years, but for some of them, and had said nothing, had held those papers in her hands and chosen her husband over her mother, her comfort over my freedom. But I also understood something else, something that, if I am honest, gave me a complicated feeling that wasn't quite hope, but was in the same family as hope. She had hidden the papers. She hadn't destroyed them. I don't want to compress what happened next into something too neat, because it wasn't neat. It was months of careful work, of attorneys and conversations, and a process that ground as slowly as every legal process grinds. I used almost all of $31,400. I found an attorney in Lexington named Donna Strathmore who had spent 20 years on wrongful conviction cases, and when I laid everything out for her, she listened without interrupting and then said, "The documents are the key. If she still has them and they match what's in the financial record, this is winnable." We didn't go after Patrice. I want to be clear about that. It was my decision, not Donna's. There would have been a case to make, an argument that she had withheld material evidence. But Patrice was my daughter, and there are some things a mother cannot do, regardless of what has been done to her. What we did instead was approach her attorney. Because by that point, Patrice and Devlin's marriage was, as 7-year-old Nora had so plainly observed, not doing well, and make clear that the document's existence was already known. The deposition of Nora could establish that her mother had found and hidden them, and that Patrice's cooperation would be viewed very differently than her resistance. Patrice called me herself. That was not something I expected. It was a Sunday evening in February, 4 months after I had found Nora in the cemetery. I was in my apartment by then, a small 1-bedroom in Covington, modest but mine. And my phone rang, and it was a number I recognized as my daughter's, and I sat there for 2 full rings deciding whether to answer. I answered. She cried. I did not. I had used up all of that, and what was left was something I couldn't name. Not forgiveness, exactly. Not yet, but maybe the beginning of the road that leads there eventually if you're willing to walk it. She told me where the papers were. A locked metal box in the attic of her house on Sycamore Ridge. My house, the house Gerald and I had built our life in. She gave me the combination. The papers were everything Raymond had described. Gerald's handwriting on the cover sheet. Copies of the forged loan documents, account statements with dates circled in red pen, and a single handwritten note from Margaret Ashworth, dated 2 weeks before her stroke, that said, "If something has happened to Gerald Morrow, please take these to the Harlan County Sheriff. His wife is innocent." I held that note for a long time. I thought about Margaret Ashworth, who I had met perhaps 3 times, who had been a small woman with silver hair who brought green bean casserole to church potlucks. I thought about what it meant that a near stranger had done more to protect me than my own daughter had. I thought about a little girl in a purple jacket placing a wilted wildflower against her grandmother's grave. The case was reopened in April. Devlin was arrested in June. The charges were extensive: financial fraud, forgery, and, based on new forensic review of the original autopsy and Gerald's medical records, a reopened investigation into his death. There had been a medication, a blood pressure medication Gerald took daily that in high doses can precipitate cardiac events. Devlin had, as Gerald's emergency contact, periodically picked up Gerald's prescriptions. The pharmacy records still existed. I will not tell you the outcome of that investigation because it is still ongoing as I tell you this. What I will tell you is that Devlin Ashworth is no longer a free man, and the house on Sycamore Ridge Road has been returned to me through civil proceedings, and I am living in it again. Strange and familiar at once. Full of clocks that Gerald never finished restoring. Silent on every shelf. My daughter and I speak on the phone on Sundays. It is not easy. It may never be easy. There's a version of this story where I tell you we have reconciled completely, where I tell you that love healed everything, and that version would be more satisfying and it would not be true. What is true is that we are trying in the way that people try when they have hurt each other past the point of easy repair, carefully and imperfectly and without any guarantee. She brought Nora to see me last month. Nora is 8 now. She walked into Gerald's living room and looked at all the clocks on the shelves and said, very seriously, none of these are working. No, I said, they're not. My grandpa could fix clocks, she said. But he's gone. I know, I said. Mine too. She thought about this for a moment. Then she picked up one of the smaller clocks, a brass carriage clock that Gerald had been in the middle of repairing, and turned it over in her hands with great care, the way children handle things they sense are important. Maybe you could learn, she said. It doesn't look that hard. I looked at this child, this small, solemn, purple-jacketed child who had walked up to a stranger in a cemetery and, without knowing what she was doing, handed her back her life. And I thought, maybe she's right. Maybe it doesn't look that hard. Maybe you just have to start with one piece and understand how it connects to the next, and keep going until something that was broken and still and silent begins, slowly, to move again. I am 64 years old. I have a house full of stopped clocks and a daughter I am learning again, and a grave I visit every Thursday with yellow chrysanthemums. I have a check, or I had one. Most of it is gone now, spent on attorneys and deposits and the 10,000 small costs of rebuilding a life. And I have a one-bedroom apartment I no longer need because I have my house back. And I have the particular freedom of a woman who has lost almost everything and found that she is still standing. I don't know what Gerald would say if he could see all of this. He was a quiet man, a careful man. He would probably say something understated and precise, the way engineers do. Something about load-bearing walls, about structures that look ruined but still have good bones. I think he would say the bones are good. I think he would say, keep going, Clara. You were never as alone as you thought you were. And maybe that's the only lesson I have after all of it. Not that justice always comes. It doesn't. Not always. Not fully. Not that family is reliable. It isn't. Not always. Not the way you need it to be. But that sometimes a stranger's grandmother keeps your papers in a box. That sometimes a 7-year-old girl in a purple jacket says the thing that cracks the world back open. That sometimes the person who saves you doesn't even know they're doing it. They're just leaving a flower on a grave, talking to someone they love, and telling the truth the way children do. Simply, without calculation, without any idea of how much it matters.